John, it's a great privilege and pleasure to have a chance to hear something about your life and work. Could you tell me first where and when you were born?
I was born in South Wales, in Carmarthenshire, a small mining village not far from Llanelli, between Llanelli and Carmarthen, on December the 15th, 1932.
And tell me something about your family. You can go back at least to your grandparents if you would like to.
Well, my maternal grandfather was a gardener in a place not in the Swansea Valley, and my grandfather on my father's side was a sort of engine driver and a farmer also in Carmarthen. My father was a coal miner, but he worked his way up to be an overman, which is the highest you could go without going to take a degree or some qualifications. And the village in which he worked was an extremely lively one, very culturally advanced, lots of music, lots of drama, and lots of rugby and football and sport and so on. My father went to the First World War, and that influenced him profoundly. I mean, it was his university, really. He was obviously an extremely intelligent man. And the things that he told me about, he fought in Gallipoli, won the military medal in Gallipoli. He fought in the Somme. He went to Africa, he went to the Isle of Patmos, and then read about St. John and Revelation and all that sort of thing. So he taught me a great deal. He had great linguistic skills, but he was quite hopeless mathematically. He was a great dog lover. There were 5 children. I was the last but one. One brother who was also a coal miner all his life, and 2 older sisters, and a younger sister who passed away, died of infantile paralysis, which is most unusual, at the age of 8 when I was 11. And I was brought up a little further up in the valley, in the Gwendraith Valley. It's a well-known little area where the coal mines run out, and where beyond that valley you come to the agricultural areas of Carmarthen, and they're beautiful. It's the setting of Dylan Thomas's Fern Hill, for example. And what was so nice about the grammar school that I went to, which was the Gwendraith Grammar School, was that there was a mingling of the sons and daughters of farmers and rural agricultural communities, and also the sons and daughters of coal miners. And there was a big contrast, the former class were rather lugubrious and slow and, very, very sort of matter of fact, didn't really rush to do things, whereas I noticed in retrospect that the sons and daughters of the coal miners, somehow because they felt they were living in danger all the time, were much more alert and quick-witted and better rugby players, better outside halves and so on. It was a rugby school. There were 4 Welsh internationals from there, Barry John, Cameron James and all these things. Sport was a pretty big effort, but the teaching was excellent. I was brilliantly taught by a physics mistress who started telling me about Michael Faraday when I was
What was her name? Do you remember?
Irene James. Oh, I kept in touch with her until the day she died. Irene James, she was a wonderful teacher. And she had the gift of not just telling you what physics was about, but mentioning to you what Isaac Newton was like, and what the great Lord Rayleigh was. And Michael Faraday, of course, captured our hearts, and he became my hero at the age of 14, 15. And one of the greatest of joys for me was to then, much, much later, occupy the chair that was created for him, and to do the job that he did at one time as director of the Royal Institution. And my inaugural lecture, they had Irene James sitting in the front row. So it was quite an evening. So that's my background.
Your mother?
My mother was very wise also. She left school at the age of 12. She had none of the linguistic skills that my father had. She spoke to me throughout her life in Welsh. My father decided when I was 10 that my English was so atrociously bad, he was petrified with the idea that I might not pass my 11 plus. He expressed a very firm, imperious edict. From now on, I speak to you in English and you answer in English, which is what I did until the day he died, in 1954. My mother was one of 9 children, and she was a shrewd lady, took the measure of things, had a phenomenal memory. And I think I've inherited something from her. I've got a reasonably good memory, which helps me in my science. You know, what I've discovered is some of the really great scientists that you come across have absolutely incredible memories. You know, I mean, Linus Pauling, for example, could write down the entire periodic table of 100 elements in 1 minute 40 seconds.
Good heavens.
And get them all in the right order. In a lecture.
Did you ever meet him?
Oh, yes, I did. Well, I shook hands with him, but I never met him, got to know him, but I heard him lecture 2 or 3 times.
He was one of the few double Nobel Prize winners, wasn't he?
He was indeed. He was the only man, and he always liked to say this, who won the Nobel Prize twice alone, you see. I mean, you know, you can win the Nobel Prize, you could get a quarter Nobel Prize, you can get a third Nobel Prize, you can get a half Nobel Prize, you can get a full Nobel Prize.
What about Fred? Did he win it with?
Oh, Fred won it once outright, and a third on another occasion. That's pretty good. Marie Curie, I think, won it 2 halves. Only about 5 in all.
And Linus almost did it a third time with DNA, didn't he? I mean, if he...
Yes, although he was a good bit behind, I think, but he was, I mean, extraordinarily threatening to the 2 people, the 3, in fact, who finally got it for that major breakthrough. Yes, indeed. His son, Peter, was in Peterhouse, of course. He sent his son to work in Cambridge. He was so impressed by John Kendrew and Max Bruce. Yeah. So that's my background. South Wales. I went to this grammar school, very well taught.
And you were a sportsman?
Yes, I was a Welsh walking race champion, actually. I was quite a good cricketer. Played for the University of Wales at cricket. I played rugby reluctantly because I didn't like, you know, the body contact of the game, but you were not allowed to play soccer at my school. You just weren't allowed. It was regarded as a sissy's game. But I was very good on the athletics field. And as a cricketer, I played in South Wales and Monmouthshire, first-class cricket, and was a left-arm spin bowler and an opening batsman. I really enjoyed that. I played cricket until I became a professor, and then I found I had too much work to do in the summer.
Did you have any other particular hobbies? I mean, music or...
Oh, I liked listening to music, and of course the chapels of South Wales were brilliant places for getting the Elijah, the Messiah, you know, Judas Maccabeus and so on.
Lots that you really like Handel, do you?
I do, yes, I do. Well, the creation, you know, one of the most incredible memories. I was about 6 when I heard the college, the choir in the chapel and all the congregation singing "The Heavens Are Telling the Glory of God," you know, in the creation. Fabulous. The other thing I took a great interest in at a very early age, and was induced by my father, was bird watching. He knew all the birds that there were in that area, you know, and he could tell me how the skylark went about its nesting, and how the nightingale sometimes came very, very rarely to that part of the world. But, you know, I knew most of the birds, and I used to go collecting birds' nests, eggs, with a boy who was 6 years my senior, who was extremely knowledgeable. We did it very responsibly. We only took 1 egg away when there were 6 there, or 5 there. We wouldn't take 1 away from, shall we say, a jay's nest where there were only 2 eggs. But, you know, you could detect the linnet, you could spot the yellowhammer, and of course the Welsh words for birds are marvellous. The dipper is called Meurig, the blackbird of the water. Beautiful, right?
Lovely.
And it's lovely. The J is screch accord. Now it's on an onomatopoeic description. Screch means the terrible screeching of the bird, and that's exactly what it does. It's not mellifluous bird from the point of view of its song. So I like that. And I like reading too. I mean, Children's Encyclopedia, Arthur Jamie, and H.G. Wells, his history, outline of world history.
Do you remember, you said you had a good memory, do you think that imprinted itself at all on you?
Oh, it did. It did indeed. Absolutely. No, those two books were marvelous. I mean, and in the Children's Encyclopedia, there was a lady named Dorothy Crowfoot. I thought, what a strange name, Crowfoot. Of course, you know, it was either Jones, Davis, Thomas Watkins, or Williams, right? Crowfoot. Why would he be named Crowfoot? Anyway, she turned out later to be Dorothy Crowfoot Hodgkin. The Nobel Prize winner, solved the structure of insulin. But she wrote many articles in the Children's Encyclopedia. And when I got to know her, and I got to know her very well, she came to many of my lectures in the Royal Society and the Royal Institution. I used to talk to her about the fact that she did influence me. Another person who influenced me, by the way, was J.B.S. Haldane, in a most unusual way. He was an ardent communist, as you know, and he wrote regularly in the Daily Worker. Now, it so happened that in the barber's shop in the mining village where I grew up, the local communists, there were several of them there, and they were passionate, intellectual communists. They could tell you what Lenin had written, you know, what Marx had written. They were authoritative individuals. You listened when they spoke on the street corners. They would deliver, free of charge, the Daily Worker every morning to the three barbers' shops. So when you went in, you could always guarantee, as well as titbits and London Illustrated News, you got the Daily Worker. And I remember reading this man, J.B.S. Haldane. How strange that you should have three initials, you know. You could have John, you could have David, but J.B.S. He wrote in such authoritative terms about why is there so much iron in the body. Describe hemoglobin. You know, there was a wonderful essay which he later wrote up and has been reproduced many times since on being the right size. You know, if you were to drop a mouse down a well, a dry well, it would drop 20 feet but then run away. Try doing the same with an elephant. That was the analogy that he did. On being the right size, what's the strength of your bones? What are the dimensions? How do you lose heat? He was a scientist, and he would talk about the atmosphere of the planets. He induced my interest in science a great deal through that adventitious factor, you know, in the barber shop. So up until O-level, so the school certificate it was called when I did it in 1949, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. In fact, it was a great good fortune that R.A. Butler's most important Education Act of 1944, it meant that I could go to school free. Because I started going to grammar school and my father had to pay. But in the middle of World War II, or at the end of it, the 39-year-old R.A. Butler defied Winston Churchill. As Minister of Education, he said, "We are wasting the potential of this nation. We don't allow people to go and have free education up to the age of 16 or beyond." And I went to grammar school, and then at A-level, I really immensely enjoyed myself. I mean, I did quite well in geography, in English literature, in physics, and in mathematics at O-level. I did quite well in some of the other subjects. And I wanted to do physics, mathematics, and geography. The headmaster decreed, no, the timetable will not allow that. I can't make that work. You'll have to take chemistry. So within 3 weeks or 4 weeks, as a result of being the only student in the class, the teacher there would spend in a 2-hour lesson the first hour talking about rugby and why we lost to Swansea or something the previous Saturday, and the next hour doing chemistry. And I read an extremely important book by a man whose name I still remember, Eric James. Of course, Eric James later became Lord Rushmore, Lord James of Rushmore, and he was Eric James, the High Master of Manchester Grammar School. But he was the chemistry master, having graduated at Oxford, at Winchester. And he wrote a book called Problems in Physical Chemistry. And what struck me about it was so elegantly written. It was like reading a novel. You know, Thomas Hardy was one of my father's favourites. You know, Under the Greenwood Tree, Fall from the Madding Crowd. These were the books. There weren't many books in my home, but those were the kind of books that he read. But there was mathematics in it too. I was exhilarating by what Eric James wrote. And I think if I were to see him, I was in his home the other day as a result of giving a public lecture at the University of York. I felt, you know, his spirit was pervasive there because he did influence me in an ineffable kind of way. So once I went into the sixth form, I kept going playing rugby and playing cricket and doing a bit of my athletics. I was still a Welsh walking race champion. But I found the academic life so exhilarating and so interesting. I went off to Swansea. I was accepted to go to Cardiff, Swansea, Bangor and Birmingham. And then I got frightened going to Birmingham. So I don't think I could have survived in a large city. I just wanted to play cricket for Swansea. It struck me as being a nice thing to do. So I went to Swansea and I was extremely well taught there. The undergraduate education that I received there from people who had been very carefully chosen by a man who was outstanding. Later became Lord Fulton, J.S. Fulton. He became the first Vice-Chancellor of the University of Sussex. John Fulton really knew what universities were about. He was a Scot, he was a philosopher, a Balliol man, but he really could inspire people. You know, I look back at that phase of my life and say to myself, you know, how fortunate I was to be in a college. There were only about 1,000 people in the college in all the subjects, but very bright people in whichever subject you looked at. But he was the leader, and when he spoke, he was inspiring. You know, he didn't talk about fundraising and things like that. He talked about, you know, what is democracy? We had to read essays to him. All the first-year students, can you imagine this? About 250 of them. They each had to write an essay, 4 essays in all, on various subjects. He gave you a list, you could choose one at a time, every 2 weeks or so in your first year. You had to read an essay, one of them to Rush Rees, the philosopher, who was a big friend of Wittgenstein, as you know. Others you might read to the assistant lecturer in French, or the reader in physics. And you had to talk about, you know, the idea of nationalism, for example. Speak to the professor of history on that. But John Fulton took us in 4 at a time. We would each read our essay, and then we'd have an hour's conversation. Now the top man found time to do that. That's impressive. Really made a lasting. The other thing that he did, which set him apart, I know, every Tuesday afternoon, every single first-year student in Swansea had to go into the largest lecture theatre. He would get world-class people, Isaiah Berlin, talking about the Brothers Karamazov. I'd never heard of the Brothers Karamazov. You know, I just didn't know anything about them. But you had the phenomenon of Isaiah Berlin standing in front of you, starting to speak at top speed and then accelerating. You must have heard him.
I've heard him, actually.
And then you had Gerald Moore talking about the art of accompaniment and with the piano man. Absolutely mesmerizing. And, you know, Garnet Rees, who later became professor of French in Hull, on Marcel Proust and the psychological novel. Kingsley Amis, who was a member of staff there, talking about the novel. Why was it that Jane Austen and George Eliot and others all came more or less together? How do you account for this? And how important is the novel? And how long ago did novels start? A wonderfully educating thing. And of course, you had the scientists there too, somebody talking about transinfinite arithmetic, or relativity, or the revolution in modern physics. So that was a fabulous education. I really reckon that in a small Welsh provincial college, I received first-class education. I don't think I would have had much better had I come to Oxford. I was petrified of going to Oxford. I thought, I could never get into a place like that. Nobody from my school ever went there. Lots of people have been since. The current British ambassador to the United Nations went to my school, and he came to Cambridge, but he's 10 or 15 years younger than I am. So that's the background.
Mm. So you were specialising now in chemistry, or?
Yes, chemistry is a pretty central subject. So I don't say that boastfully, but it sits in such a position in the natural sciences that you can look at the biological world, you can look at the medical world, you can look at the physical world, you can look at earth science. Now, I'm a physical chemist by description, really. I was head of physical chemistry when I first came to Cambridge, and was a physical chemist at Aberystwyth, where I was head of chemistry there. But I do my work these days in an area called catalysis. Everybody knows what a catalyst is in a metaphoric sense, right? Well, in a literal sense, there's something magical still about a catalyst. You have a solid or a liquid or a drop of something, or even a gaseous material. And that material has the ability to accelerate the combination of two or more reagents and give you a product. Not only gives you a product, there's a knack associated with designing a catalyst such that it gives you a particular product where it might, in principle, cause a fast reaction to give you 10 different products. But what you want, and this is the secret, for example, in trying to make, shall we say, pharmaceuticals from plentifully available material like hydrocarbons, stuff that you get from oil. Oil is nothing more than a mixture of very many different kinds of hydrocarbons, plentifully available. Now, how do you take those and treat them in such a way that you get a precise product which is of great value? It might be a polymer, it might be a textile, it might be a building material, it might be an insulator, it might be a conductor. More and more you look for, good things which are chemically useful in a medical sense. So my job these days as a chemist, and it has been for the last 25 years or so, I've written 2 university texts on catalysis, heterogeneous catalysis, only because there isn't one single phase. It's not all in a liquid or all in a gas. There's a mixture of solids and liquids, and that mixture is described chemically as being heterogeneous, naturally. Now, how is it? My job is to design a solid, a crystal usually. I'm a sort of molecular architect or an atomic architect. Try to assemble a particular structure which is solid, which is full of holes. It's got a huge surface area, but paradoxically that surface is internal. It's like having a sponge, except that it's more rigid than a sponge. And there's more holes than there is of the material between the holes, as it were. And now inside those holes, I place, metaphorically and literally, a group of atoms which, when they are exposed to an incoming reactant or collection of reactants, they convert those reactants to a desirable product. Take, for example, nylon. Nylon is produced on a megaton scale in the Western world alone. Now, it's produced at present in a very environmentally harmful way. To produce it, you start from essentially oil, you start from benzene, and you get benzene into an oxidized state. Then that's only the beginning. From there on, you need to have really aggressively reactive materials, concentrated nitric acid, fuming sulfuric acid, right? hydroxylamine hydrosulfate, very nasty, explosive, capriciously unstable materials, right? Now that's the way it's produced. And for every kilogram of nylon 6, there's 7 different types of nylon that you produce nearly 4 kilograms of waste. Ammonium sulfate, which isn't even a fertilizer. It can be used for building material, but it's terribly wasteful. Now, my job, in fact, one of my best papers was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of the US 2 years ago, in which my postdoctoral worker and I described what is known as a green synthesis of nylon. If you look up the web and the internet and you put in my name, green nylon, you'll see the story, because I was interviewed by Australian television about it and various things. It's interesting. Now, I'm not saying that overnight we've now transformed the way in which nylon is manufactured. I was doing this as an intellectual exercise and a proof of principle, saying, now look, in the laboratory, we can, by judicious use of chemical dexterity, as it were, and solid-state chemistry and solid-state physics and physical chemistry and so on, organic chemistry, bring them all together, do things in an ingenious way. It sounds self-complimentary, I know. And then you can show that you can indeed produce handsome quantities of nylon that way. That particular piece of work was the only piece of work that I had mentioned in the New York Times and in the Cambridge Evening News on the same day.
I noticed that you've taken out 20 or something patents. Did you take a patent out on this or not?
No, we didn't, although we were thinking of it at one stage. And, I don't like taking out patents, to be quite honest. It's a laborious job. And I'm much more of a Welsh poet than I am of a lawyer. I just don't want to sort of sit down laboriously and, aridly going through all the facts. The reason why I've taken out 20 patents is because I've often been supported in my research work by big companies. The Bayer company in Germany saw what we were doing about 10 years ago in Cambridge and got extremely interested. And I sent my postdoctoral worker to go over there because they have excellent equipment. German chemistry is still the best in the world. It's far better than American chemistry and British chemistry. And the big German companies have been dominant, even if they were before World War II. They were demolished during World War II. They built themselves up and they're still flourishing. Anyway, Bayer liked what we were doing and they filed the patents in our name. They did about 10 or 12. Now BP did something similar, and Honeywell have done something similar. Borax have done something. Simply because, I believe in a mixed economy, right? I've done most of my work sponsored by the Science Research Council or Engineering and Physical Science Research Council or by the university. But from time to time, because of the nature of my work, since it's immediately applicable in industry, some of the tricks that I've learned, or the techniques that I've evolved and developed and designed are useful in the extreme for these people. So they say, well, come and be a consultant, visit us once a year, give us a lecture, and we'll give you £10,000 that you can use in any way you wish. So I can get a student from India to come and work with me. Or I can ask somebody who's finishing his PhD to stay on another year. And in that way, we build up nice, healthy relationships. There are no strings attached. I'm very firm about the view that one shouldn't sell out to the multinationals in universities. I think there's a real danger that that's happening, by the way. But I don't want to pursue that too much. You can question me on it if you wish. But I've got grave concerns. And I've expressed this in a lecture that I gave to the Royal Society and to the various other societies. And I find, much to my satisfaction, that a very large number of people in the university were feel this. I think there is a real danger that you have big companies linking themselves to prestigious universities like Cambridge. They get a lot of benefit out of it. They can recruit in America or India or China by so saying, look, our name is that of Cambridge. Cambridge has been going for 800 years. Some of these companies might shrivel up and die within 20 or 50 years. And they're there to make money. Whereas we are concerned primarily to pursue knowledge and to discover new knowledge and to exploit it in the best way. I mean, there's got to be a bit of give and take, and we've got to be realistic. These big companies pay large taxes, and the taxes go to build our universities and to sustain our universities. So I want to take a very open view on this, but nevertheless, I'm concerned that things have gone a little too far.
Do you want to name names? Is Microsoft, for instance, which is a very big operation?
Well, it depends how it's done, you see. I don't dispute that, for example, if a company, this has been well developed in America. I go to MIT, Caltech, and Harvard, and Yale, and so on. They have very clear rules there, much clearer than the rules that have suddenly emerged in the last 10, 15 years in Britain. Now, I don't think I don't know enough about Microsoft, but it worries me. I possibly don't quite know how the financial arrangements work out in the sort of BP Cambridge relationship, because these are embedded research institutes. In some of the departments in Cambridge, I have to be very careful here because I don't want to be called into court on this, but in some of the departments in Cambridge, you have multinational research centres, and those research workers don't mingle freely with the surrounding community. They can go into every seminar that's given in that department, but not every member of the department can go into their ring-fenced entity. Now that's not right.
Mm.
I'm sure you probably know that, but I'm sure you'd agree with me. I'm disturbed by that. It should never be like that. I had one of my best ever students. He's an absolutely brilliant student. He's the sort of man whom I could say could well win the Nobel Prize. He came to Cambridge recently to lecture, and he fully expected that there would be quite a large audience with people from all over the community of scientists in which he was working, among he was working, only to discover that it was a very select group, and these people were closely oriented to a multinational company. So he was there almost to educate them in a particular desired mission-oriented research. Now, mission-oriented research has to occur, and it sometimes occurs in universities, and I'm indulged in it myself. But I do believe, nevertheless, that the intellectual freedom is sacrosanct, and it must come first.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. Let's go back to the biographical approach. You've now finished at the university. You then took up a job as an assistant lecturer, or?
I did, yes. Well, in fact, after finishing my PhD, which I did in Queen Mary College, London, because my supervisor, a wonderful Oxford-trained chemist, a wonderful human being, a public school boy, whom we didn't meet very often in Swansea, who had all the qualities of a noble individual.
With a name?
The name was Keble Sykes, and he came from Northumberland, and he was at Oxford trained by Sir Cyril Hinchell. He was a gentleman, he was kind, he was extraordinary. And I sort of wanted to work with him because he had knowledge bursting forth, Well, he went to Queen Mary College, London. I did my PhD there. And then stupidly, I joined the Atomic Energy Authority. In fact, I worked in the Atomic Weapons Research Establishment, which was the silliest thing to do, because I needn't have done any military or any sort of reserved occupation. I needn't have gone into any reserved occupation. All those people who had graduated with first class honours were excused. They could go to do whatever they wished. But I was somehow struck by the idea that the equipment side at Aldermaston was so good that I would enjoy myself there. Even after a few weeks, I realized this was the wrong place to be. It was producing atomic weapons. You know, I'm ambivalent at best about that. And generally, you know, I think I would take the rot black view. You know, I didn't want to be there, and I quickly began to apply for jobs, and I got an assistant lectureship at Bangor, lovely part of North Wales, you know, and how delightful it was to immerse myself in North Wales culture, you know. My Welsh was never extremely good when it was in South Wales, but it improved enormously in North Wales. And I had a lecture. I used to sign up for the extramural department. They went out to the villages in North Wales, from the Sheen Peninsula right up to Mold, Flint, and out into Anglesey. And I enjoyed that immensely. I did a lot of evening lectures. I gave 2 years running a 25 lecture course on the history and evolution of science. I'm embarrassed. I read Herbert Butterfield, I read some other books extensively.
J.D. Bernal?
I did, yes, I did. Oh, I grew to admire him enormously. But there was a very fine Welsh book, would you believe it, by a man who was reader in chemistry at Aberystwyth. He'd been a Cambridge man for 10 years at Trinity Hall, working with Sir Eric Rideal, and he and his wife wrote a book in Welsh on an outline of the origins of modern science. It was extremely good, and I used it as a text. Well, that's what encouraged me to do a lot of public lecturing, you know, and I used to enjoy lecturing to school children and do some lecture demonstrations. I did this in English and in Welsh. But in Bangor, I was given intellectual freedom. There wasn't much equipment around, but there were some very bright people on the staff. At one stage, Bangor University had about 5 Fellows of the Royal Society. It's not bad, you know. I mean, some provincial British universities had none. I mean, you know, Hull or Leeds, for example, had 1 or 2, whereas Bangor had 5. So, you know, that gave you an inspiration and a feeling that you belonged to a good place. I enjoyed it immensely there. I'd have been happy there all my life, behind the Welsh field. But, you see...
Happier, did you say, or happy?
Happy. I'd be very happy there. And the reason why I left, actually, was that, and I don't like telling this story, but it's true. A new professor came, and it was very obvious that he wanted to starve me of research students, and wanted really to stop me from doing research. Because he wanted to have those students who were graduating in the undergraduate class for his own research work. In retrospect...
You were a reader by this time, were you?
I became a reader, yes. I became a reader at quite an early age, actually. I was 32 or something. And I'd done some good work, I think. Well, I won a prize which was open to everyone in the British Commonwealth, called the Corey Morgan Prize, the best chemical research for a person under the age of 36, anywhere in the British Commonwealth. And they gave 3. And one went to Oxford, and one went to, I think it was Cambridge, yes, and one came to Bangor. So it was not a bad sense of achievement. And also a new major society in America, the American Carbon Society. They'd spotted my work, they'd invited me over, and they gave me a new prize that they instituted. So that made me feel good. But so I felt unhappy as a result of my new boss. And you know, if you're unhappy in your work, you can't do good work, really. If you feel that all the time there's somebody trying to stop you. Once to the undergraduates at a lecture that nobody could work with J.M. Thomas for the next 3 years.
That's bizarre.
Terrible, isn't it? I mean, anyway, another door opened. I mean, Aberystwyth's chair became vacant, and some of my friends said, you should apply for it, and I got it. And that was an exhilarating period of my life. It was a well-organized department. The head man used to be the chief statistician in the Ministry of Food and then afterwards the principal civil servant in Wales, Sir Goron O'Daniel. Extremely clever man. And a brilliant registrar. If you wanted, you wanted money to extend your laboratory, or you wanted to do something that enabled you to get a slightly bigger running cost grant, for consumables, you went and spoke to the registrar. You would find ways of helping you. Marvelous, such people. Also, I was able to attract people from Cambridge, from Oxford, from India, from Japan, from Russia. I built up a department there of solid-state chemistry. I know it sounds very boastful, but I can honestly say it was probably the best in the world in that area. And I was invited in 4 or 5 years' time to go as a professor at Birmingham, at Manchester, Liverpool, Edinburgh, London, and I wasn't interested because I was so happy there. My children spoke Welsh, they sang Welsh nursery rhymes, bird watching was wonderful. My wife was doing a higher degree in comparative religion, in the Avatara doctrine in Hinduism. And I was going to stay there too for the rest of my life, but then I heard that the University of Cambridge were going to offer me a professorship. And Dame Rosemary Murray phoned me up one day and said, we would like to offer you the chair. Are you going to take it? And I agonized over this because I knew I wanted to come to Cambridge, but I began to think, well, look, am I going to drown in Cambridge? It's so full of extraordinarily brilliant people, and I think I might just wither away. And also, would my children be happy? My younger daughter at that time spoke no English. She was 6. Well, I didn't speak any English till I was about 8. So she was about 5. Anyway, we came, and it was one of the best things I ever did, actually. I came to King's, as you know. I found King's.
What year was this?
1978. And I tell you what I liked about King's was the elderly people who sat in the combination room before you went in to have dinner. Maya Fortes, wonderful man, Clifford Derby, Kendall Dixon, Braithwaite, Christopher Morris, excellent people, really excellent. And they befriended me. Patrick Wilkinson, what was the name of the keeper of the Fitzwilliam? Jaffe.
Michael Jaffe.
All those people, you remember them.
Yes, I was
there.
They
were fabulous people. They were so nice. Christopher Morris was a gentleman.
I shared this room with him for 20 years.
Yeah, well, when I came and stayed here, before I actually implanted myself in
You probably stayed in this room.
I stayed in this room, yes, I think I slept in this room.
This was a guest room, yeah.
Yeah, and I used to look at his books, you see, and the range of interest that he had, J.G. Dunn's Serial Universe was one book that he had up on it.
Well, you might have been the person. When I came to this room, it had been emptied of a guest room, and he said, Alan, it used to be a guest room, but I'm afraid I had to protest to the college because I found that a number of my books were disappearing with the guests.
Well, I'm sure that would have happened, yeah. He was wonderful. So I enjoyed it. It was Dan Brown who actually persuaded me, because again, I knew very little about Cambridge, really. I'd been here to lecture, I'd been invited to lecture in the Materials Science Department, metallurgy as it was then called. And I can remember vividly, it was March of 1974, I walked up from the backs towards King's, and I couldn't believe how beautiful the place was. It was absolutely stunning. The daffodils and crocuses were out, and the sun glistening, the trees were bowing in the wind and all that. It was so indescribably beautiful. My wife and I were bowled over by it. So that memory was lodged in my mind when I was invited to come here. And I could have gone to 3 or 4 other colleges at that time and did seriously consider it. But this man, Mansell Davis, at Aberystwyth said, look, you go to King's. The music of King's is wonderful. You will never regret that. And my wife was very musical. And I love music anyway, and I've loved it more and more as I've grown older. Though I never play any musical instrument. I have 2 daughters who played beautifully. One was played for the English Chamber Orchestra. She's a professional musician. She is now BBC National Orchestra of Wales. But the joy of coming to King's was that I could mingle with lots and lots of people. I can't honestly say that I enjoyed meeting every single fellow of King's.
What about the provost, Edmund?
Well, he also was an interesting but strange man.
Yeah.
I think he was a strange man. I remember sort of meeting him for the first time with Dan Brown. And I think Martin Rees was there. I befriended Martin very early on. I could resonate with him. There was a man named, what was his name now? He collaborated with Alan Bullock. He committed suicide. Do you remember him? He was doing the P.M. Forster book. Gosh, I remember
Yes.
his name in a moment.
Yeah.
And I used to enjoy going for long walks with him. He was a cultured individual. Absolutely, really nice. Oliver Stalybras. Do you remember him?
Yes.
Yeah. He was never a fellow though.
No. Yeah. And Hal, did you know Hal Dixon?
Oh, I got to know Hal. Hal was, I think Hal succeeded Dan as vice provost,
Yes.
I think. And Hal was outstanding, and so was his wife. And, you know, in so many different ways, one of the small ways, but very significant ways in which they arranged every Christmas time or New Year to have all the children and fellows together in a little party. And that was a pinnacle, you know. It was good for the children, it was bonding, brought the fellows closer together. I used to enjoy meeting Charlie Logue, of course. I got to know very quickly. Tom White and others, you know. Lots of people in there.
Bernard Williams?
Yes, Bernard. I got on famously with Bernard. Yeah. Bernard was great fun. And Sidney Brenner, too, of course. He can be a very colourful character, very interesting.
And Gabriel?
Gabriel, Gabriel and I were admitted the same night, actually.
Really?
Yeah, we were.
Gabriel Horn, that is. Yeah.
Yes, Gabriel Horn, but he came back from Bristol. See, he'd been a fellow earlier. No, Gabriel and I, we became friends almost overnight. And Patrick Bateson was very kind. He and his wife were friendly with my wife and me.
How would you characterize the kind of quality of, I mean, the buildings and the music you've mentioned, but and the older fellows in the combination room? It's got a reputation as quite an open and left-wingish kind of college.
Yes. Well, I thought at first that, to be absolutely candid with you, some of the younger Turks who were very left-wing were what I had read were being described as cocktail party socialists. You know, I was brought up in the socialist community, which was really socialist in the most compassionate and intellectually satisfying way. I really was. You know, people who had altruism and philanthropy imbued throughout them. And all their actions were based on trying to build a better world. Whereas I saw one or two of the individuals in the Savanival congregation, for example, making comments which I found not genuine. I couldn't accept those, you know. But I tell you a positive side that I very much appreciated. At lunch, or at the dinner table, but especially at lunch, mingling with people in other subjects, in genetics, or in medicine, or in astronomy, or in philosophy, or in history, and getting to know, what they thought about their world. I could ask questions and they could answer them. I thought that was great. And The music too was wonderful. I mean, going into chapel and listening, and going to the Advent Carol service and listening to the quality of the music. Philip Ledger was in charge then. And as soon as Stephen Cleavery came, I instantly struck up a friendship with him, which has lasted to this day. We're very big friends. And of course I've got to know David Wilcox and, relatively recently, and he is a charming, absolutely wonderful human being. I hope you could interview him sometime.
I should do, yes.